What's up, Colts Nation? A little bit of breaking news here. The Indianapolis Colts have decided to sign defensive tackle Taylor Stallworth. You may have seen a video earlier a couple days ago. The Colts had hosted Stallworth and another player, Tavon Wilson. And basically per COVID-19 regulations, if you have a player in for a visit, you have to basically intend to sign them. Well, the Colts make it official with Stallworth. A little bit about Stallworth. He's only been in the league 2 years. He's 24 years old. A younger type of player. He kind of came into the league in 2018 after being an undrafted free agent from the Saints, had a pretty solid training camp and had a pretty solid preseason as well. So good, in fact, that he actually was able to make the Saints 53-man roster in 2018. But then he got waived in 2019 and was just floating within and out their practice squad last year. But the Colts make a decision now to add a little bit more depth on their defensive tackle position. Stallworth is, I believe he's around 300 pounds, so he's probably going to be more of a run-stopping defensive tackle. But Derek, initial reaction here to the Colts signing Stallworth and adding a little bit more depth into their defensive interior.
Yeah, I mean, basically that's it. More of a depth piece. I don't necessarily know how much we're going to use him in impact, but this is another guy that, you could have as another depth piece for the 53-man roster, or you could just decide for a practice squad guy to help out. Like you said, 6'2", 305 pounds. He's a big guy, most likely a defensive run stopper. It's pretty much what he is at this moment in time. Obviously good enough as an undrafted free agent to make himself apparent in this league, even though he didn't play much in the 2019 season. It'll be interesting to see what the Colts do with this. I don't know if he's going to hover around the practice squad with this or not, but nonetheless, it's still interesting. It shakes things up in that defensive line room.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, do you think this has any potential impact on some of those other interior defensive linemen? Probably not Sheldon Day or Grover Stewart, but you think Tyquan Lewis, Robert Windsor, you've already talked about. Some of those guys, do you think this could potentially have any impact on them making the final 53-man roster this year?
Yeah, I don't necessarily know if I think that I don't think that this necessarily changes much for me right away. I don't necessarily think so. I think this is just another piece to add that, because of COVID regulations that, you can add a few more guys to the practice squad. Maybe that is what goes on here. But outside of that, I just don't think this really changes much on what the Colts are going to try to do with the defensive line group coming into this season.
Yeah, I was going to ask why you think the Colts made this move, because I think initially when I heard it, I was like, wait, defensive tackle? You mean they're not bringing in a corner to, potentially, or another offensive lineman? They're bringing in a defensive tackle? I feel like that position out of any position is probably the one that I say needs the least amount of help, at least at this point in time, especially considering what the Colts did in, obviously free agency and even in the draft. So I'm curious, if you think why you think this move was made for the Colts, and what you think was the point of it, and I'm just kind of curious on your take on that.
Well, I mean, I think that it basically strictly had to do with depth. It's one of those guys that, like you said, it's one of those things we're allowed to add. We're basically allowed to add more guys to the practice squad, right? And you're trying to get guys that'll help keep this team ready. I think adding a guy like Stallworth helps the interior guys for the Colts when they're trying to practice. Remember how they were talking about Quentin Nelson was complaining to Ballard about not having guys in there ready to help him out when, they needed to practice and get guys that were good enough to be prepared and get ready for good opponents. I mean, Stallworth is just a big body guy. It's going to be a good piece for the Colts to be able to work and see what they want to do in certain situations. It is quite interesting that they decided to go with a defensive tackle, the first guy that they mentioned. I mean, we were talking a lot about the safety group and the cornerback group needing help, but not necessarily the defensive tackle group. But that's just my piece. I think they're just adding it for potential practice points. But outside of that, I don't really know exactly what was going through the mind of that, but I'll have to hear more from Ballard and Reich when that happens.
Funny enough, the Saints added Margus Hunt to their defensive line this year. So it's kind of like we're swapping players here. They get Margus Hunt, and we obviously get Stallworth. So it'd be interesting to see kind of what Stallworth can bring. And who knows at this point? He obviously played super well last preseason or a couple preseasons ago that the Saints felt like they wanted to take a chance on him. And maybe he has another, shines out in training camp and the Colts decide we like him a little bit more than we like Tyquan Lewis, Robert Windsor, whoever it is. But it'll be interesting to see. But yeah, I think strictly at this point, it's for depth purposes, and it's also for more competition. We know how much Chris Ballard likes to add that competition and really is kind of a fanatic about the offensive and defensive line. So it'd be interesting to see. He seems like he's a talented player. It'll be interesting to see kind of what he brings to this Colts defensive line. But all right, that'll wrap it up. So for Derek and myself, thanks, guys, and go Colts.